Hey everybody, welcome back to the Health Bridge. It's Dr. Sarah Gottfried and I'm here with Dr. Pedram Shojai.
Hey everybody, hi Sarah.
Hey Pedram, and we are rebranding the gut today. The gut is sexy. That's what we're talking about. We're going to make your gut sexy today with Steve Wright. Steve, welcome to the show.
I'm just excited to be here. Let's make it sexy.
Yeah, let's make it sexy. And, first sexy fact about Steve is that you're an electrical engineer. I mean, it doesn't get sexier than that. And you've got this amazing background. You've got this super cool website where you are indeed making the gut sexy for the world. So I wanted to talk to you today, maybe first about how you got into this stuff. Like, how did you, I think about you, when I think leaky gut, I think Steve Wright. So I want you to kind of connect the dots for our listeners today.
Okay. Yeah. So obviously, once you get that degree, electrical engineer, you're branded sexy for life. So, but no, I just had gut issues kind of on and off growing up. And then I had the typical college experience of 20 credit hours a term. I was in a fraternity, so I did my fair share of partying. And coming out of college, I was 60 pounds overweight and had a bunch of acne, a bunch of digestive issues, kind of alternating constipation, diarrhea. And the worst thing was gas and bloating. And my family nicknamed me the gas man. So it got really bad. And I tried the traditional route of low fat and exercise, and I was able to lose some weight. I went to like 5 different modern medicine physicians. They all said, eat more grains. There's nothing really wrong with you. This is your genetics. And for a while, I just tried to man up, right, and just own that and move on with life. But it got so bad that I got called into my boss's office for stinking up the Cube Farm when I was in a consulting job in Chicago. So apparently when you work with, Fortune 100 companies, they want it to be nice smelling in the office. And I get that. So that was kind of like a wake-up call. And good thing that I had a great buddy from college, Jordan Reasoner, and he had celiac disease. And he had started the Specific Carbohydrate Diet because gluten-free did not stop his diarrhea. And even after 2 years of like the most crazy things of replacing every pot and pan and the whole counter, the whole kitchen, like this, he was like I don't know a better word for it, but a Nazi about not being gluten, and it wouldn't work. And so he had started the Specific Carbohydrate Diet. It stopped his diarrhea. I called him kind of because we could bond on this health stuff. And he's like, look, man, you got to change your ways. You got to start cooking at home. You got to start taking in better food quality. You can't be eating out and doing all this kind of, happy hour lifestyle that I was doing in Chicago at the time. And so that's what led me down the path. That diet stopped my gas in 3 days and then, started to regulate my poop and my stools, and I started feeling better. And then I began to question, why did this happen? And why do I have to eat these very narrow food group to feel the way I feel? I still didn't have great energy. And so it was another 4 years of hiring functional medicine practitioners, just throwing about $30,000 at tests and supplements and all kinds of therapies, trying to figure out what worked, what made logical sense, and then what had science backing. And so that's where my engineering came into it. Was as we started going down this path, it was like, wow, what's the one of the problems that isn't solved yet, which is what engineers really do, is just solve problems, and it's the human body and health. And so it took a long time for me to figure this out, but the engineering mindset of like testing and tweaking is really what got me to where I am today, and really starting to try to spread the message that you don't have to be chained down to your digestive issues, your stomach problems. And if you are past that and you're on to progressive diseases, that things like healing your leaky gut and things like that could be the way out of those issues.
So can we get into the specific carbohydrate diet a little bit? Because I know a lot of the listeners are going to be like, what? You already told me I can't eat gluten, and someone told me I can't eat dairy. Now you're telling me I can't eat what? And I want to do this with the caveat of saying, look, guys, this guy went from like stinky overweight to studly and happy. So, there's obviously a really big win on the other side of this. So I'd love to hear what that means. Like what is a specific carbohydrate diet?
Yeah, it was a diet that was started in the 1920s, actually, when they were trying to work with young celiac children. And it's been passed through different books. The most The book that's you could easily find in a bookstore right now is called Breaking the Vicious Cycle from Elaine Gottschall, and she adapted her methods from Dr. Haas, and we've since kind of on our site, selifestyle.com, we've sort of tried to give the best practices. And essentially what it is the idea that carbohydrates could feed imbalances in gut flora and or specific infections. And also the idea that if you have a damaged gut, your ability to break down long-chain carbohydrates is compromised. And so I think, in most medical ideas, the first thing is remove the causative agent. And so with a lot of GI issues, a lot of them are related to carbohydrates. And so if you can remove that long enough and address any root issues, then you can begin to rebuild the gut and open your diet up again. So it is a grain-free, processed-free diet, low additives. The only dairy that's allowed is fermented dairy that you do at home. But we at SC Lifestyle, we try to discourage anybody to do that for the first 30 days. And that idea kind of comes from GAPS and from the 100,000 or so people that we've helped over the last 5 years with this. And really just the idea of that cooking your food at the beginning, going back to meats and fruits and vegetables, are going to be the easiest things for you to digest. And then I think people who are chained to their stomach problems don't realize or remember what it was like to not have those. And so if you make that change and in 7 days, whatever that is that you're dealing with goes away, the diet's going to be way more, or that's bad grammar, but it's going to be very easy for you to tolerate because you're going to be like, holy cow, I can be a human again. Because anybody with an upset stomach is not feeling good. They're not able to give love to other people. They're focused on themselves. And I get it. It sucks. It hurts. So when I have it, I'm focused on myself too.
So, Steve, I want to understand. You just dropped an F-bomb, fruit, and I want to talk a little bit about fructose and SCD. So, can you get into that a bit? And I also feel like at some point we should circle back to leaky gut and just define that for our listeners.
Sure. So fructose. My opinion on it is it's been demonized coming from processed food sources, and I think that's a correct call out there on fructose. But if you look at fruit and you look at the way we've evolved or whoever created us, whatever your ideas there are, it's a monosaccharide. It flows along with glucose, and in moderate amounts that you might get from natural food sources, our bodies are built to be able to process this. And so there are obviously conditions like diabetes or other things where you might specifically limit fruit. But for the most part, I don't try to limit or call foods good or bad. I like to encourage people to think about what works for them and what doesn't work for them. If you have small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, or if you have a yeast or candida infection in your gut, those organisms feed on these sugars much more readily than they will feed on other things. You can't starve these things out. They will eat protein, they will eat mucus. So, but in general, if you have these types of infections and you're feeding them a bunch of carbohydrates, you can really manifest a lot of symptoms. So I think that's where narrowing fruit down to help with symptomology or whatever your specific condition really helps. And then again, once you get over that root cause, open the diet back up again. Some people thrive on a heavier carbohydrate diet with a lot of natural carbohydrates, and some people don't. And then leaky gut really sort of ties this in where leaky gut's the separation of in between your cells. So in the gut, there's only one cell thick. It's kind of crazy, like your skin, like on our arm here, we have like 7 layers, but in the gut, we only have 1. And we have these tight junctions. Well, we have many junctions, but the first junction is the tight junction, and it really seals these cells shut. But we can have certain things like the infections I just mentioned or stress, or there's like over 19 triggers that have been identified in scientific research that begin to separate these cells. And then when that happens, you have all kinds of things that the body was trying to keep out of the body in the body. And that could be toxins, it could be natural foods, it could be anything. And so when this happens, the immune system reacts to it. The body always has our best interest in mind, I think. And so the immune system's like, oh boy, this is bad, like attack. And so whether that's beef or toxins, it's going to go get it. And then this can lead from local inflammation into systemic inflammation throughout the body, causing, and leaky gut's related to almost every chronic disease that it's ever been studied in. And that goes from even cancer and heart disease. So it really manifests itself largely. And so that's why I'm so passionate about the gut, because I think it's really, people aren't talking about it enough.
That's fantastic. When you talk about the bad bacteria and the overgrowth and all this, I've talked to a lot of patients over the years about this, and they're like, well, it doesn't show up in my labs, or my doctor says it's fine, and all that kind of stuff. So can we talk quickly about how some of this stuff is kind of sliding in under the radar, and how your conventional doctor might not be picking up on this stuff? And if you're gassy and tired and brain foggy and all these things, it's a pretty good indicator that maybe, it's somewhere you want to look.
Yeah, it's the research on SIBO is growing every year, and now they're starting to show, like, if you've had gastroenteritis, if you've had like traveler's diarrhea even once, your ability to get SIBO goes through the roof. I can't remember the actual study, but I think it was 2 or 3 times, maybe more, every time you get it. And so I think for a long time we just viewed the gut as this unsexy sort of garbage thing. It just does its job, right? But now we're starting to learn that our gut flora can interact with our brain, they interact with our immune system, and they interact with that gut barrier that I was just talking about, and they help regulate all of these things. And they also help us break down the food that we eat. And so I just think that it hasn't been taught very well in conventional medical training. And so your typical doctor who hasn't been in med school for a long time, and who's not attending sort of functional medicine or naturopathic style courses, probably never even going to hear of this condition except for that one obscure digestive course or in the textbook that they read a long time ago. So I just don't think it's being talked about enough, but there are conventional medical tests like the lactulose breath test that any physician can order in the United States and can rule this out.
Yeah, so let's talk about SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. I feel like this is we're almost at an epidemic level in terms of the frequency of SIBO. It seems like I see it everywhere I look. Once I started looking, once I turned that corner away from mainstream medicine and started doing more functional medicine. Can you talk about what we know in terms of the number of people who struggle with this? And I think I said this on another show that, when you are growing the wrong kind of bacteria, what my friend Daphne Miller calls the Homer Simpson type of bacteria in your gut, the ones that make you fat and dumb and inflamed, it's not a good thing. And I think SIBO is one of the key ways that we know that people have Homer Simpson bacteria that they're walking around with. So can you just tell us, like, how frequent is this? And are some of those symptoms that you were talking about, I wrote this down, you were told by your boss, don't stink up the cube farm. So if you have gas and bloating, maybe tell us some of the symptoms of SIBO and how common it is.
Yeah, sure. So gas, bloating, especially constipation, but diarrhea is also part of that. Any sort of like gurgling, upset stomach feelings, if you're feeling nauseated after eating, for instance, meat and things like that, a lot of times that can be a good clinical symptom that you have something going on there. And then, as Pedram mentioned actually earlier, this begins to manifest itself in brain fog and depression and anxiety. I believe the latest study I saw was 70% of fibromyalgia patients have SIBO. So SIBO begins to manifest in like chronic fatigue and all these syndromes that we don't quite have names for yet. SIBO is usually found in occurrence with especially acid reflux. So I think it's about 50 to 60% of people who have GERD or acid reflux also test positive for SIBO. So any of those risk factors, especially the gas and bloating and those chronic symptomology issues, I think if you have that, you have to dig deeper into this area. And I think the one of the reasons why, one of the thoughts behind SIBO is that if you lower the amount of stomach acid in your body, you increase the prevalence of getting SIBO. And so one of the most common ways that we're lowering our stomach acid these days is through stress. And so it's like beating a dead horse. I know stress comes up probably on all of your podcasts, and nobody wants to hear about it, especially me. But I still struggle with myself. But the stress inhibits the stomach acid production and then increases the risk of SIBO. So I think the more we go on with our Western lifestyles and we forget about everything that you both talk about all the time about reducing stress and kind of chilling out as we eating mindfully, we just increase that risk factor every time.
So, without getting too, geeked out on SIGA and some of the things that stress actually does, and Sarah talks about cortisol more often than I say robbing Peter to pay Paul. So we've done a few shows on that in terms of like how bad stress can be, and obviously, guys, stress is the devil, and we know it. I want to kind of go into the microbiome real quick because we're talking about the bad guys real quick, and we've been talking about SIBO and kind of the overgrowth of the guys that you don't want in the neighborhood. But what's your philosophy on reinoculation and how you get some of the good bugs back in, and how we can kind of turn the tide on this thing?
Yeah, great question. I think, so there's this thing called the Human Gut Project that Jeff Leach is behind. And on a podcast that I did with him, he said, make sure that with every shopping trip or every bite of food, you're feeding your own nutrition as well as what lives in your gut, because you really are. And so I thought that was a really cool mindset shift about how we should look at eating. And I think we need to stay away from the processed foods. Personally, I believe a grain-free diet is the way to go, but I don't, if you want to eat grains, that's your prerogative. But as far as cultivating the best gut flora and the reinoculation, I think fermentable fibers through fermented foods or through eating a non-ketogenic diet, unless you have a health symptom or a health issue that would benefit the rest of your life from eating a ketogenic diet. Carbohydrates and vegetables and fruit have fermentable matter in them, whether that's fiber or the carbohydrate structures. And so we just need to give more of that non-processed vegetables and fruit, cooked and non, as you can handle them, because as you rebuild your gut, as your health increases, your ability to eat a bigger, diverse diet increases. And so those people who have the most wrecked guts have the narrowest food possibilities to be able to feel symptom-free. And so as you get more resilient health, your diet will expand. And I think, if you can't handle probiotics, doing some like soil-based organism probiotics or something like that instead of fermented foods is a great idea. Resistant starch is a great option as well. Just make sure you start super tiny. I just got another email yesterday of a woman who'd done a tablespoon to start off with. No, that's gonna make your day really awful. Start with like a half teaspoon or a quarter teaspoon. But again, that's just feeding the bacteria essentially with fermentable mass. And so I think if you start there and stay there, you're going to repopulate and do what you need to do down there.
So last question, Steve, before we talk about how people can learn more about you, I want to pick up this resistant starch idea because I feel like it's almost like a trending topic on Twitter. So can you just maybe explain, so that we all feel smart, what resistant starch is? You just talked about how you got to go slow and low when you're first beginning with it, but just explain what you mean by resistant starch.
So resistant starch is a type of carbohydrate. We'll just kind of keep it high level here. So it's a type of carbohydrate that isn't found in a lot of different foods. Most people are talking about potato starch, unmodified potato starch, when they're talking about supplementing with it. However, if like you cook white potatoes and then you leave them in the fridge for a little while, they begin to grow more of this resistant starch. And so what some studies have found is that resistant starch will increase the level of bifidobacter in your gut. And that's really helpful. Bifido is, in the right population size, considered a very healthy bacteria. It can overgrow. And so it's just a reminder that we need a good balance. It's an ecosystem down there. And so resistant starch will begin to feed pretty much all the spectrum of bacteria. So if you start on resistant starch and you have very unbalanced gut dysbiosis, is what it's called, you could feed, as we were talking about, the bad bacteria, if you will, or the ones that have overgrown, and exacerbate your problems. But in general, what we're talking about is taking like a rocket fuel for your gut bacteria and slowly pouring it in. And slowly is the key. Like an eighth of a teaspoon for someone who's really messed up, maybe a 16th. And, just kind of move that up every 2 days or so until you get to a tablespoon or two. And a lot of people have found a normalization of their bowel movements. So getting a Bristol number 4, number 5. I don't know if we talk about the Bristol stool chart on this show, but if your listeners haven't heard of it, I hope they Google that. It's a perfect way to talk with your doctor, your kids, your spouse about how well you're pooping, which is great. But constipated people can really benefit from resistant starch, especially if the magnesium or vitamin C or something else that they're doing isn't quite working. I found that doing that low and slow approach with resistant starch can really help those constipated people.
Right on. Okay, so I want to recap some of these pearls of wisdom that you've shared with us, and then we'll ask you to explain how people can learn more. And keep me honest here. So if I get anything wrong, you just let me know. So number one, I couldn't resist writing this point down. Don't stink up the cube farm. So I actually didn't know this about you, that SCD actually removed your gas in 3 days. I mean, if you're one of our listeners and you suffer with gas, this is the time to listen up. So number two, you talked about how the specific carbohydrate diet started in the 1920s. And you mentioned the book, Breaking the Vicious Cycle. And then you also mentioned your URL, scdlifestyle.com. And I think it's just important to emphasize some of these points, that you want to learn the details of SCD if these are some of the symptoms that you struggle with. And the idea is that certain carbs can feed the Homer Simpson bacteria. I just keep repeating that because I just love saying it. Going grain-free, processed food-free, eating fermented dairy, but not until after the first 30 days, at least in the way that you teach it, Steve. Number three, you talked about leaky gut, and I can tell a fellow engineer. My degree is in bioengineering. I was doing a PhD in bioengineering when I turned the corner and went toward medicine. But you talked about the 19 triggers that open up the gut barrier. I just love that kind of stuff. I mean, 19 triggers. Like, I totally want to know what those 19 triggers are. And so you got to remember that your skin is 7 layers thick, your gut 1 layer. So you got to really take care of it, keep those tight junctions as they were meant to be. Number 4, you talked about SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and Pedram asked you about why this flies beneath the radar for mainstream clinicians. And you made this point that, and I will affirm this, in conventional medical training, we just don't learn about this stuff. Even though the tests for it, the ways that you diagnose it, are things that any licensed physician can order. Number 5, you talked about how the gut flora interacts with the brain, with the immune system, with so many different systems in your body. And you want to think about this as a whole integrated matrix. And that's, part of why we want to make the gut sexier for our listeners. Number 6, you talked about some of the symptoms of SIBO, including gas, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, and then as it becomes more systemic, brain fog. You also mentioned this interesting fact about fibromyalgia and how 70% of people with fibromyalgia have SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And then, oh my gosh, big stress. You're right. We won't shut up about big stress, but you brought in this truth bomb about how stress lowers the pH. It basically lowers your ability to produce stomach acid, and then that sets the stage for SIBO. How did I do, Steve?
That was pretty awesome recap. I don't think my memory's that good yet.
Well, I had to write it down. If you're wondering what all that scratching is, it's me taking notes on Steve. So, Steve, tell people how they can learn more from you.
Well, if the SCD diet or learning about how carbohydrates and different foods impact your gut is where they'd like to learn about, the scdlifestyle.com is the right site. There's over 500 articles up there for free. And, of course, we have an ebook about how to execute the diet the way that we did it, and thousands upon thousands have also done that now. If leaky gut is really kind of the thing that perked your interest, we have solvingleakygut.com is another site that we've recently started. And there's one major article on there that's 4,000 plus words. And if you read that one article, it's on the main page, you're going to know more than 99% of doctors out there. And so it's probably the best free article on the web regarding leaky gut and how it begins and what it can attack in your body. So those are the resources. We try to, my goal is to give people the information I wish I would have had. Because if I had a time machine, this is the kind of stuff, this is what I would have needed to cut my healing time in a half or 2/3. And so that's really my goal, is to get these resources out to people who are suffering with this stuff.
Love it. My favorite part about your story is, you're a regular dude in a completely different part of the universe, and something just kind of like knocks you off the road trip of life type of thing, and you're like, dude, this isn't acceptable, and you found solutions, and you went and found the right answers, healed yourself, so you're a living example of it, and now you're here to help other people and inspire other people. So right on, man. Thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you. Thanks for giving me this platform to talk to everybody. I hope it helps out.
Oh man, so many people suffer from this. I know there's going to be tons of listeners that are going to benefit from what they learned here today.
Yeah, no question. And Pedram and I are going to go get your leaky gut article, the 4,000 words, and we are going to be so smart. Right, Pedram?
That's right. With what he said there, it's like, oh my God, I got to know more than all these doctors.
That was my goal. Is to make sure that anybody could learn it.
Awesome. Well, we're going to read it and we'll share it with our audience, and also healthbridgeshow.com. And lots of cool stuff coming for you guys. We're going to be ramping up a lot more resources for you, and Steve's is obviously going to be front and center on there because we love what you're doing, man. So thanks for being on the show, and we'll keep following up with you because you're out there helping people.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.